From Washington, D.C., this is the best of Muslim news on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. On behalf of Muslim Network TV, I wish you all a happy 4th of July. Let's watch the best of our news reports.
Climate change is real, and it is happening right now. These are not scenes from a Hollywood film like Blade Runner. This is Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. It looks surreal, like a Martian planet, but it is actually dust. Yes, thick clouds of orange dust are covering the whole city. It is the 8th sandstorm that has hit the city within the last month. Here is the $1.5 billion tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. It was designed to be seen, but many days this year, it cannot be seen even from nearby. It is covered up by sandstorms. Here is Doha, Qatar, which is soon to host 32 nations for the FIFA Men's World Cup. This is Africa, the largest continent of our planet. It is facing the worst droughts in history. Food and water is difficult to find. Human beings are suffering, while animal corpses rot. There is already 1 million climate migrants. 20 million people are at the risk of starvation. 10 million children need urgent life-saving support. But Africa is not the only place facing extreme heat. Pakistan and India are facing unprecedented heat waves. This brick kiln worker in Jacobabad, Pakistan says, "We feel like throwing up." Here in Pali, India, residents are waiting for the water train. Here is Shivaram, Bandai village resident. 10 years ago, this pond used to be flush with water, but now there is no water. We are facing lots of problems due to water scarcity. There is no vegetation, everything has dried up. The water is running out in Indo-Pak cities, where the neighboring Bangladesh is drowning in floods. 2 million people are left stranded. Bangladesh is not the only one drowning. Osaka in Japan and Miami in the USA face drowning as well. This is Salha Farouk from Toronto studios for Muslim Network TV. The FIFA World Cup is one of the biggest events in the world. It is happening this year in 2022. Qatar is the first Muslim country to host this tournament. Muslim players like Zinedine Zidane, Karim Benzema and Mesut Ozil have engraved their names in the history of this sport. A lot of Muslim players will be representing their countries this year, like the legendary Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, and Riyad Mahrez. France won the 2018 World Cup. Its team was hailed as one of the greatest teams ever. One reason the French team was appreciated so much was its diversity. It had 7 Muslim players: Paul Pogba, Ousmane Dembélé, and N'Golo Kanté are some of the biggest names in the game. French victory gave rise to a whole lot of French Muslim girls who wanted to play football as well, but unfortunately, they are being blocked. On January 18, 2022, 160 French senators voted to prohibit religious symbols within sports federations, therefore during official competitions. That will keep many Muslim girls from playing soccer. But these football-playing girls are not giving up on their dreams. This is Paris's Luxembourg Garden. It is just behind the French Senate, which is trying to block girls with hijab from sports. They are protesting their ban from sports competitions. They have even formed a union. It is called Collective Les Hijabeuses. It means a collective of headscarf-wearing soccer players. Here is Fone Diawara, co-president.
Qui pratique un sport en particulier qui est le football. Et donc encore une fois, on est...
What bothers us is that thousands of women are being left out of this sport. They exclude us, whereas the fundamental values of football and sport are to unite and to come together. We don't see why we would remove it. There is no reason, there is nothing in the law, so I don't see why we should be forced to remove it. Above all, it is something personal. There is nobody who can ask us to remove it. France must not force French Muslim girls to choose between their faith and football. This is Salha Farouk for Muslim News. "40 years of wars have left Afghans poor. First, the Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, then came the United States. Today, more than 50% of the population lives below the poverty line. 97% of the Afghan population is predicted to be plunged into poverty by next year. Afghans mostly live on bread and tea, but sometimes even bread is not available. Many Afghans do not have jobs. Those who do have not been paid well before the Taliban took over. Farida Shahzad, a widow, has a job. She is a cook at a school, but her salary is not enough for living. I live in Kabul. I have 6 children. I am waiting in front of the bakery to find bread. I am a cook at a school. My salary is not enough to cover the rent of my house and the expenses of all my children. I'm waiting for the bread here because I have to," she said. The poor Afghans are lining up outside of the bakeries for bread donations. They are waiting for hours in the extremely cold weather. This is happening in the country's capital, Kabul. Here is an Afghan woman, Mava Niyazi. "We are not beggars. We are unemployed. Everyone waiting here has economic problems." Here is another woman, Sakiba Sakur, who has been waiting outside this bakery for bread in the cold for more than 3 hours. "My husband is disabled. I take care of a household of 11 people. We live in a tent." Here is Matinullah Safiyi. He is a generous bakery owner. "We give these people around 50 to 60 loaves of bread a day. They sit in front of the bakery for hours in this cold weather. Their financial situation is very bad. It is like that every day. This scene reflects the situation in Afghanistan. It wasn't like this before. The 40-year-long war has ended, but a new war is making things worse. The United States froze $9.5 billion in Afghan assets. Then the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund did the same thing. Those hurting the most are salaried people working for the former American-supported government. The UN forecasts that around 22.8 million people, or over half of Afghanistan's population, will face severe food problems. This is when the world is closing its borders and eyes from Afghanistan.
Coming up next after the break is Best of Our Muslim News in-depth analysis. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me, for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Sound Vision has a summer plan for your kids. Keep them busy and having fun. With creative teaching methods. Songs, stories, art projects, and more. Amazing teachers and role models. Lessons that build love for Allah. Positive identity as a Muslim. Summer fun has just begun. Learn about animals in the Quran. Arabic vocabulary. Beautiful names of Allah. Science in the Quran. Visit distant Muslim lands. Learn fun facts about the country, the people, and how to cook special dishes, all from the safety and convenience of your home. Visit academy.adamsworld.org for more details. Hurry, classes start on July 4th.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime? And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Today, we'll be discussing an issue that I think every single American is aware of, and that is the issue of inflation, this drastic rise we've seen in the prices of goods across the economy. What is the current state of inflation in the United States? Why did this happen? What, if anything, can be done about it? Let's discuss that today with our special guest, Pia Malaney, who is the co-founder and director of the Center for Innovation, Growth, and Society, and a senior economist at the Institute for New Economic Thinking. Pia, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Very happy to have you. So let's start with just a little basic information for our guests. What is the state of inflation in the United States right now, and what led to this problem?
As most of us have probably been feeling in our pocketbooks, inflation is now at a 40-year high. And there's a huge amount of concern. We're hearing the Fed talk about how they want to raise interest rates in order to deal with this. We're talking about concerns about a wage price spiral and how we need to rein in the economy. So to answer your question, let's look a little bit as to why we might actually be in this position. We had low interest rates for decades, and then we got hit by the pandemic a couple of years ago. And in the face of what could have been one of the worst recessions we've ever seen, the government decided to start easing money supply and start pumping money into the economy by essentially giving people tax breaks and sending out child credits and just giving people money so that while they were forced to stay at home during the pandemic, they'd actually be able to keep the economy going, be able to feed their families and pay their rent, and just keep going. But as a result, there was a fair amount of money pumped into the economy. And the second piece of this is that people wanted to stay home, obviously, because you don't want to go into an environment where you're likely to get sick, especially given that the US workforce is not really offering most of its workers universal health care. We're not offering paid sick leave to a lot of our workers. Childcare is a huge issue. So women needed to stay home to look after their children. So we had a lot of workers leave the workforce. We also had a huge pressure on our supply chains, because one of the things we saw was that since we couldn't go out and eat at restaurants, we didn't want to travel, we weren't using services as much, no one wants to be in a gym or getting a massage during a pandemic. So the demand for services dropped significantly, and many of us shifted that demand over to goods. We were working at home. We needed new laptops. We wanted to redo our home since we were spending more time. We wanted our own cars since public transportation was suddenly much more threatening to use. So people started spending a lot of money on actual goods, and that increased demand for goods. And we had a lot of issues with our supply chains because they couldn't keep up in the face of COVID with the increased demand that we were seeing. So inflation really arises when you see a discrepancy between aggregate supply and aggregate demand. And we saw supply affected and demand affected. And so we ended up in the situation we're in now, especially as people started going back to work and we start seeing more money flowing to people as workers start getting their incomes back.
So that's a fascinating turn of events. So, essentially during the pandemic, the government provided financial support to people to keep them afloat. At the same time, supply chains were impacted by the spread of the virus. And then you had an increase in this demand because people had more money. It seems like a perfect storm. What, if anything, are policymakers doing about this? What can be done about this? Or do we just have to ride it out?
Oh, no, I think there's definitely things that we can do about it. Now, here's the issue. Policymakers are looking at different pieces of this. If you want to address the aggregate demand piece of it, then you can do what the Fed wants to do now, which is to raise interest rates. And what that will do is it will place downward pressure on aggregate demand. What it essentially will do is create higher unemployment and push the economy into a recession by pressuring aggregate demand down. And that will have an effect on inflation, but that will be after a long lag period, and it will come at a significant cost. It's also not very effective. If you manage to raise interest rates by 1%, you may, over a long period of time, maybe 5 quarters, bring down aggregate demand bring down inflation by about 0.5 percentage point, and that's going to come at a cost. So INET just put out a paper by an economist, Sarvaz Storm, where he looks at the empirical the history of how we did with controlling interest rates in the past and trying to control inflation through the use of interest rates. And he finds that it's very costly in terms of unemployment and recession and what it actually does to people who can afford it the least. So that's one path that we can go. And that's what we're hearing a lot about from the Fed currently. The other thing we can do is we can look at the supply side, which I think is where much of our inflation is really being driven by. So the supply chain issues that I talked about before, we need to look at what is causing problems with our supply chain. One of the issues is that people have not really gone back to work in the same numbers as they were working before the pandemic. So we have a lot of vacancies, and the Fed is concerned that wages are too high. Now, let me just point out that if we look at the contribution of wage increases to inflation, it's only been about 8% of the inflation we're seeing. If you want to push wages down, you're going to end up having workers bear the brunt of the solution. And the effect is going to be significant in terms of, once again, the pocketbooks of people, and we're going to pay for it on the backs of workers. If instead we start looking at what we can do to get workers back into the workforce, we should be thinking about how we can give them healthcare, how we can do something about childcare so that women can go back to work. How do we make sure that if they're sick, they have paid sick leave? All the things that workers need to actually support them so that they have a desire to go back into the workforce. And that's a better way for us to deal with the wage pressures than what we're currently seeing, which is the desire of the Fed to actually just bring wages down. And Jerome Powell has been very clear about the fact that the approach that they're taking is really to try and bring wages down. So I believe that we need to be thinking more broadly about how we can address some of the supply side issues in the face of the supply side shocks that are really driving much of this inflation.
So, Pia, that is concerning to hear, because it sounds like what you're describing is that the way the Fed is going right now, they might eventually bring down inflation, but there's a good chance they're going to cause a recession while doing it and cause harm to your average worker out there. So your recommendation would be to focus more on the supply side of things. Let me ask you this. What do you expect to happen if the Fed continues along this route, and given that they have this independence that allows them to really not really answer anyone, what do you think the next year is going to look like? Do you think inflation is going to naturally level out? Or do you think things are going to continue to get worse, prices will continue to rise?
I think it depends on how certain things play out. So to the extent that the Fed pushes interest rate rises, I think we are going to see worse inflation. We're going to see a recession. I think left to its own devices, if we could actually just control the pandemic, I think we'd go a long ways towards getting people back into the workforce. If we can provide some of the longer term support that I talked about, we can help people get back to work. And I think that would be a way of bringing down inflation. Now, I should say that there's another factor at play here, which is that corporations, seeing these high inflation rates, have realized that because there is so much more monopoly power today than there ever was before, that they can raise prices to not only cover the cost of rising wages and to cover the cost of rising inputs, but over and above that, so that they can increase their profits. So if you remember when I said that wages were contributing, the rise in wages was contributing about 8% of the current inflation, the rise in corporate profits has contributed more than 50% to the inflation that we're seeing today. And we have earnings reports from major corporations where they talk about the fact that inflation is good for them because they can increase their profits, because they can raise prices over and above what they need to. So we're seeing corporate profits at a higher than they've been in the last 20 years, maybe. We're seeing, for example, in the area of shipping, profits of 150 billion, that's up from 25 billion just 2 years ago. One of the reasons for this is that we have 3 shipping alliances that control 80% of our shipping lines. So because they have such a strong monopoly, they can raise prices and there's no one stopping them. So now we're in the situation of asking the government, can we do anything about this? And we're actually starting to see some efforts on the part of the Democrats to try and control this. So we have some bills that are coming up in front of Congress to look at price gouging. And we have Bernie Sanders putting forward a bill to actually try and institute a one-time profit tax, a very high tax on the profits from the last 2 years, over and above a certain amount, up to a 95% tax, which we've done before in the face of, wars and other shocks to try and control price gouging on the part of major corporations. So we have some tools within our control to try and control this.
And I guess the question is, will we use them, or are average people going to have to suffer a lot more in the coming months and potentially longer? We will see, God willing. P, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience and your expertise. We look forward to having you back sometime in the near future to see where things are and if things are moving in the right direction. We hope so, God willing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Sound Vision has a summer plan for your kids. Keep them busy and having fun. With creative teaching methods, songs, stories, art projects, and more. Amazing teachers and role models. Lessons that build love for Allah. Positive identity as a Muslim. Summer fun has just begun. Learn about animals in the Quran. Arabic vocabulary. Beautiful names of Allah. Science in the Quran. Visit distant Muslim lands. Learn fun facts about the country, the people, and how to cook special dishes, all from the safety and convenience of your home. Visit academy.adamsworld.org for more details. Hurry, classes start on July 4th.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. Than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Scholars have pointed out that Facebook played a critical role in genocide of Rohingya Muslims in Burma. Now, a new report by New York University School of Law, though not focused on India, is talking that YouTube is being weaponized against Muslims as well as women in India. We have the lead author of the report with us, Paul Barrett. Paul Barrett is a lead author of this report and adjunct professor at New York University School of Law. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you.
Tell us, what are the salient findings of this report?
Well, the report looks at the continuing problems that YouTube has in filtering out misinformation and hateful content from its platform. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the segment, one of the countries that we looked at is India, which is YouTube's largest market, with more than 450 million people in India using YouTube. And in that country, one of the main problems that the platform has, or problems that the platform contributes to, is that it is a vehicle for hateful speech targeted at Muslims. And as I'm sure all your viewers know, religious animosity is a big problem in India, and the current majority party there is Hindu nationalist, and many YouTube users are using the platform to incite hatred and at times even violence against Muslims in India.
Now, there are cases on Facebook, one case especially about filed by the victims of Rohingya genocide in Burma, that Facebook did not do enough. So while studying the YouTube, have you studied what Facebook's role was in these things? Because also in India, WhatsApp probably is also the largest hold, and WhatsApp is being used to mobilize mob to go lynching people.
Yes, this report focused specifically on YouTube, but in past research, we have looked closely at Facebook and its challenges in doing content moderation in India and elsewhere, and we have noted the problems that you've just mentioned. None of these platforms has figured out how to screen out hateful speech and incitement to violence to the degree that they need to. And that's why we come back and do this research and point out where the problems are. And the problems are fairly common from one platform to the other, which is to say these are US-based companies that are obviously more skilled at doing content moderation in English and in the context of a culture that they understand. but they've expanded greatly around the world and offer service in countries like India and many others, Myanmar, as you mentioned. And they are only now really making a serious effort to try to catch up and put in place the kinds of safety provisions that they need to have. And in the interim, sadly, we have seen the weaponization of the platforms, as you mentioned.
In the case of Facebook and Burma, it turned out Facebook was using the Burmese national to monitor. And many of them, instead of banning the hate speech, they were banning people who were fighting the hate speech. In case of YouTube, we recently found out that an organization, Justice for All, based in Chicago and different places, it has an appeal on YouTube to ask for the protection of minorities in India. Their video was banned 7-8 times, and the person who was communicating was himself from Indian origin. Do you think reliance on the people of the same region creates more problem that they might be inclined to support one side or the other?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the particular case you've just mentioned, but obviously, if you have people who are overseeing content moderation who have some type of partisan or ethnic interest, that can become a big problem. But there is a tension here because you need to have people who understand the language and who understand the culture. So it's the burden should be on the company to make sure those people are impartial and are making decisions based on the merits, not on any other basis.
Does Google have any system of training these people in the culture of impartiality and the universal ethos?
The big problem here is that for the most part, the people who do content review are not even the employees of the platform. So they're not Google employees, they're not YouTube employees. They are the employees of outside third-party contractors. And the big platforms do this outsourcing because it saves them money. And it puts the problem of content moderation at arm's length. This is something we've written about at some length at our Center for Business and Human Rights at NYU. So the question of training is one that is pushed out of the company and onto the back of the third-party vendor, and I think that is a problem. And we have recommended that all of the platforms bring all of these jobs, the content moderation jobs, in-house and make these people direct employees and take responsibility for supervision, which would include, obviously, training them and being impartial in the work they do.
Does YouTube have any appeal process? Because once people are being judged, how good is the content, they make a right decision or the wrong decision. Is there an appeal process?
There are procedures, at least on the books. So in a formal sense, the answer is yes. But the whole process is far too secretive. There's not enough transparency. And this is something that YouTube and the other platforms need to step up on. They need to do a much better job of making it clear how a user can challenge a decision to take content off the platform.
What are your main recommendations for YouTube? Are you recommending that they hire people instead of contracting it out?
Yes, precisely. That's one of our main recommendations, that they hire people and hire far more people than they have at the moment on an outsourced basis. This is not because you're going to end up with a situation where you're ever going to have enough people to do a perfect job. Unfortunately, these platforms have gotten so big; they have so many people posting material on it. 1 billion hours of video a day is viewed on YouTube. It would be hard to have enough people to keep track of all that. They do have automated systems driven by artificial intelligence, and those they need to improve. But at the same time, they need to bring the content moderation jobs, the human content moderation jobs in-house, provide those people with the kind of direct supervision that they're not getting at the moment.
I see that in report you have noted that the government of India has assigned itself the responsibility of social media removing content or restoring a certain contract. Have you studied how the government of India is using it?
We haven't. We don't have people on the ground in India to do that. I think it's a very problematic policy for a government to undertake. In the United States, just for comparison purposes, the government would not be able to exercise that kind of authority under the First Amendment. And this just adds yet another wrinkle to the very complex situation created by having such a pervasive and widely used platform that people can unfortunately misuse.
Now, you have recommendation for many civil society and YouTube and the US government, but you do not have any recommendation for the Indian government, which has been declared half free by Freedom House, and Reporters Without Borders rate their media freedom around Rwanda and Afghanistan. Yeah,
you're correct. We in terms of our government recommendations, we limited ourselves to the United States government. In any single piece of research or advocacy, you're going to have to limit your field of focus to some degree, and we did not go country by country. And happily, we have brother and sister civil society organizations that are making the kinds of evaluations that you just referred to. So we hope what we've recommended can be useful as far as it goes, but we did not, as you say, make recommendations to the government of India.
Well, thank you so much, Paul Barrett, for your work.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.